Today I'll show you how to make sourdough brioche, a bread that is heavily enriched with eggs, butter, and a little bit of milk. Golden, buttery, and decadent on the outside, but light, tender, and delicate on the inside, this bread is a real winner. Enjoy sourdough brioche on its own, or slice it and turn it into French toast. And you can even use the dough as a base to make plenty of different sweetbreads. So let's get started and make some sourdough brioche. Start out by feeding your sourdough starter in the evening. Take 25 grams of starter out of the fridge, feed it 75 grams of water, and then stir that around to mix the starter and the water together. Then add 75 grams of bread flour to the jar, and mix everything together until you have a pancake batter-like consistency. Mark the top of your starter with the rubber band, close the lid, and let the starter rise at room temperature overnight for about 6 to 8 hours, or until it doubles in size. The next morning, your starter should be doubled, and it's ready to be put into your dough. To start your dough, add 100 grams of whole milk to a mixing bowl, and then add 3 eggs, which should be roughly about 150 grams of eggs. This is what makes brioche so unique and tender, is that most of the liquid in the recipe comes from the eggs. Next, add 40 grams of white sugar. This is a sweet bread after all. And then 10 grams of salt, and follow that with 150 grams of the active and risen sourdough starter that you fed the night before. Stir the starter, eggs, and milk together until everything is nice and combined, and then get out your bread flour. You're going to need 450 grams of bread flour for this dough. I used the Bob's Red Mill brand of artisan bread flour for this particular dough, but any standard bread flour should work fine for this recipe. You're going to be adding a lot of butter to this dough, and it's going to get very wet and sticky, so you can knead it by hand. I did a video a few years ago where I kneaded this brioche dough by hand, but it will be much easier to use a stand mixer. So if you have a stand mixer, go ahead and start mixing the dough ingredients together on low speed for about a minute or two until the dough comes together and starts looking something like this. Then turn the speed up on the stand mixer to speed number 2, which is kind of a medium-low speed, and let the dough mix for another 2 to 3 minutes. Your goal during these couple of minutes is to develop the gluten in the dough before you start adding the butter. So once you've kneaded the dough for about 2 to 3 minutes on medium-low speed, it should start pulling away from the sides of the bowl like this. Now you need to start adding the butter in 3 stages. This is 1 stick of butter that has been cut up and allowed to sit at room temperature until it's nice and soft like this, but it's not greasy or melted. At this stage, it's just soft and malleable, and you can squish it with your fingertips. I like to add the butter to the dough in 3 different stages. If you try to add the butter all at once, the dough will become overwhelmed with butter and it'll just fall apart. So for the first butter addition, start kneading the dough again on medium-low speed, speed number 2 on my KitchenAid. Then as the dough is kneading, drop in 1/3 of the butter in chunks right into the bowl with the dough. If the butter sticks to the sides of the bowl, the dough will eventually pick up the butter off the sides and accept the butter into the dough. Once you've added 1/3 of the butter, knead the dough on medium-low speed for about 3 to 5 minutes. During that time, the butter will start to be absorbed into the dough. At first, the dough might look really greasy because it's not really accepting the butter yet, but over time, over those 3 to 5 minutes, the dough will absorb the butter and incorporate it into the dough, and your dough will look less and less greasy, and it'll start to hold together a lot better. So now that you've been kneading for about 5 minutes, the first third of the butter should be absorbed into the dough. You can now add the second third of butter. Once you add the second third of butter to the dough, just repeat the same process as before. Knead the dough for about 5 minutes on medium-low speed until the second third of the butter is absorbed. Then one last time, slowly add the last third of the butter into the dough until the whole stick of butter has been added, and then slowly let the butter incorporate into the dough. This should take roughly 3 to 5 minutes. Then once the butter is fully incorporated, knead the dough on medium speed for 8 minutes. During this time, the gluten will fully develop within the dough, and eventually all of that dough will unstick from the sides of the bowl, and your dough will be completely kneaded. Now simply remove your dough from the dough hook, and you should have a silky, smooth dough that's ready for the first rise or the bulk fermentation. Take your dough out of the mixing bowl, plop it on the counter, and gently shape it into a ball. Now, this may have seemed like a lot of kneading, but it really is worth it. If you do the window pane test on this dough, you can definitely see through the thin film of the dough and see through to your fingertips. That means the gluten is very well developed. And at the end of the day, when you bake everything up, you'll have a strong, beautiful brioche. Now, for the bulk fermentation, or the first rise, shape your dough into a ball and then transfer it into some kind of glass container with a lid. This is the 7-cup glass container I like to use from Pyrex. Grease the glass bowl with a little bit of butter or a neutral oil or olive oil if you want to, just so you have a little bit of a non-stick layer in the bowl, and then transfer the dough into the bowl and press it down to flatten it. You want to be able to see how much the dough has risen, and you can see through the sides of the glass bowl, which is convenient. Cover up the dough with a lid or a sheet of plastic wrap so it's airtight, and move the dough to a spot on your counter where it can rise at room temperature. Let your dough rise or bulk ferment for 6 to 8 hours, or until the dough roughly doubles in size. Roughly 7 hours later, my dough had doubled in size and had reached the top of the bowl. That's when I know it's ready to move on to the next step. Now you can divide and shape your dough right now, or for better flavor, you can move your dough to the fridge for a long cold fermentation. Anywhere up to 24 hours will be fine. Then the next day, you can take your dough out of the fridge, take off the lid, and divide and shape your dough. One of the benefits you'll notice of the cold fermentation is that the butter within the dough solidifies, making the dough solidify. So you'll have a harder dough that's actually easier to shape. So that's one thing I like about doing a long cold fermentation before the dividing and shaping process. Not only does it give the dough better flavor, but the dough is easier to shape and a little bit more manageable. Now you can shape a lot of different types of breads with brioche dough, which is something I'll show you in later videos. But to make a somewhat classic looking brioche loaf, take your dough out of the bowl and then flatten it into a square like this. Then using a bench scraper or a chef's knife, divide the dough as evenly as you can into 6 equally sized pieces. Sprinkle the tops of the dough with a little bit of bread flour, then rub it around just to provide a little bit of extra non-stick protection. And now it's time to shape each of these pieces of dough into a ball. Stretch and fold the dough just like you would shape a loaf of sourdough bread. Sometimes we do this stretch and fold technique. Take an edge of the dough, stretch it up, and fold it under your thumb. Then just go around the dough ball, stretching and folding, and stretching and folding, and holding the dough underneath your thumb until you've got a tight ball of dough like this. Then roll the dough ball on the counter to smooth out the seam underneath the dough, and there you've got a smooth ball of dough. Then repeat this shaping process with all 6 balls of dough until they're all shaped and ready to be placed in the bread pan. This is a standard 1-pound loaf pan that I got from USA Pans that I really like to use. It's non-stick, but you can also use any standard bread pan as long as you grease it really well with butter or line it with parchment paper. I'm greasing my pan with a little butter because, hey, there's not enough butter in this dough already, right? Now this might look like a lot of dough. How are you ever going to fit all 6 of these dough balls into this pan? Well, it is a lot of dough, and they are hard to fit in the pan. But the good news is you don't have to be very gentle with these dough balls. You can press the air out of them if you want to. So gently or not so gently, arrange each of the dough balls in the pan side by side, getting all 6 dough balls in there to fit. The last one is the hardest one to get in. You could, of course, bake this brioche in just the standard sandwich bread shape, just a normal loaf, but where's the fun in that? Dividing the dough into 6 balls and then shaping it together as a loaf will give the brioche its classic brioche look, and it'll be somewhat of a pull-apart loaf as well. It'll be unique. So now that your dough is divided, shaped, and in the pan, it's ready for the second rise or the final proof. Cover your dough with either a damp kitchen towel or a sheet of greased plastic wrap so that the plastic doesn't stick to the dough, and let your dough rise for anywhere between 4 and 8 hours or until the dough doubles in size. Then a half hour before you're ready to bake your brioche, preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit and just have the middle rack of your oven ready to go. You don't need any baking stone or steam trays in the oven. Because of the high amount of butter in the dough, you don't need to steam it. Now at this point, my dough had been rising for 4.5 hours and it had about doubled in size. If I could do this over again, I'd probably let it rise a little bit longer. You'll see why later. But it's all about trial and error. So as long as your brioche is rising over the top of the pan, you can bake it. But before you bake, brush the top of your loaf with an egg wash, which will give your brioche a nice shiny golden top. Just beat together 1 egg with about a tablespoon of whole milk, and that'll give you a nice egg wash. Brush this mixture evenly on top of all of your brioche until all surfaces surfaces are covered. And then once everything's covered, you're ready to bake your brioche. Move this into your preheated oven that should be preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit and place it on the middle rack. Then bake your sourdough brioche at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 to 50 minutes, or until it reaches an internal temperature of 190 degrees Fahrenheit. It took my bread the full 50 minutes until it reached that temperature. And here you can see that my brioche was kind of bursting at the seams where each piece of the loaf met the other one. That lets me know that I could have let the loaf proof for a little bit longer before I baked it. It'll look better next time if I do that. Immediately after baking, take your loaf out of the bread pan and place it onto a cooling rack to cool for at least an hour before slicing in. And this is an optional step, but if you want a nice glossy appearance on your sourdough brioche, melt about a tablespoon of butter and brush it on top of the loaf. That will give your brioche a shiny, glossy appearance. It's been an hour, so I'm ready for the official taste test and I'm ready to slice in. You can pull your brioche apart into individual sections and slice those individually, or you can slice large sandwich-style slices like this. And you can see here just how tender and pull apart this bread is. What's interesting about brioche is it uses butter, eggs, and sugar, just like a cake. But we also do an extensive kneading process and we use a high protein flour. So the texture and the flavor, I would say, strike a somewhat unique balance between cake and bread. Brioche is tender, sweet, and buttery like a cake, but also strong, tall, and fluffy like a bread. The lightly sweet flavor is great on its own, but I'd say it's even better with something sweet and lightly tangy like a jam. Sourdough brioche takes a little bit of work to make, but it's definitely worth the effort. I'll be showing you a few different things you can make with brioche dough over the next few weeks. But until then, if you haven't made sourdough brioche, try this recipe.